This time, it's Moto Guzzi Breva 1100. Now before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. So the Moto Guzzi Breva series is the last really of the line of roadster Moto Guzzis that they were really famous for back in the 70s and 80s. Models like the T3 and T5, 850 and 1000cc machines. The Breva first appeared in the end of the 90s, as a 750. The 1100 model, which I'm riding today, followed in 2005. The Breva featured a series of major improvements over the original big block engine. It was the first big block, for example, where you could remove the oil filter, without having to go to the trouble of taking the sump out. They also moved the air filter from between the V-twin cylinders to it now sat on top just under the tanks. It was much easier to get at, basically. The bike features an all-new frame, all-new transmission, and fundamentally a new engine too. It's basically the same engine that you would find on the V11 Sport or the Cali for that matter. The alternator, for example, was moved from the front of the engine to between the V's where the air filter had once been. And this allowed the engine to be shorter and more compact. There was an all-new 6-speed gearbox and the transmission was completely new. And now it's used a sort of parallelogram system based within the swing arm. It was called the CARC system, C-A-R-C. And what it basically allowed was rear single shock suspension to be used on a Guzzi, on a big block. And also, because of the way the system worked, it took the torque reaction away from the suspension. You didn't need such firm suspension anymore. So you had a much more comfortable ride, it's much softer suspension. As a result, the Breva feels very plush compared to earlier big blocks or even small block V-twins. Some of which can bounce you to death. The engine is also rubber mounted, which is a first for Guzzi, and which means it's very smooth. You do feel a tiny amount of vibration, sometimes through your feet, and it's often when the engine's running cold on cold mornings, but once the engine's warmed up this tends to resolve. The 6-speed gearbox is pretty good, it snicks in very nicely, it's easy to use, it doesn't present any real problems. Let's turn here. It's very easy in use, very smooth, think the only downside of the transmission, the one thing I don't like, is that first gear seems a little bit tall. I don't really understand why, because they did this when they got a 6-speed, but you do feel like you're putting on more revs than you need to pull away sometimes. Which is it's only a small downside, but it's the only downside I can go with the transmission really. Guzzi obviously years ago had a terrible reputation for the use of their gearboxes. They used to be very, very agricultural, not unlike BMW to be honest. But overall the gearboxes in these bikes is very nice. And also on most modern Guzzis too, the modern Guzzi's gearboxes are a vast improvement from where they were certainly in the 70s. By the 80s they improved quite a bit actually. I rode a late 80s bike in the early 90s and that was pretty good. But the gearbox in these bikes is better still. The bike uses a single plate clutch, a dry clutch, quite similar to the Ducati really, and you get the same noise as well when you're sitting in neutral with the clutch off. You get this rattle of the plates on the transmission until you pull the lever in, and then that goes away. And it's basically the dry clutch plate sort of rattling between the pressure plates. It certainly makes onlookers sort of stare, because it kind of sounds like there's something wrong with your transmission, but there really isn't. It's just the way it is. Let's go past these people. Sorry, one of the advantages of the new drive shaft system is that you can fit much wider tyres. A lot of older models, in fact even the V7s up to the much newer models now, the new Mark 3s and 4s, V7s, you're very restricted on the width of back tyre that you can fit on. With this machine it's got a very wide back tyre indeed, and that's really because of the major redesign within the rear transmission, within the shaft itself. The previous system that was similar to this was used on the V11 Sport, and on that system the shaft drive was exposed, and you had greasing points, some of which are very inaccessible. They had to periodically grease. But, I mean, it wasn't a huge pain, but it simply didn't work as well as the Carc system. The Carc systems remained in use for a number of years and were killed off eventually by Euro 3 because the sales of the bikes simply did not justify updating the engines. As I said, the chassis is all new on this bike, and it's excellent. Handling's very good. The machine is heavy, it's very heavy, it's well over 500 pounds, so 230 kilos dry. And once you're fueled up and you've got luggage on board, it makes for quite a heft. If you stand at standstill moving it around, and if you lose your balance with the thing, you soon realise that there are much lighter bikes in production. But that said, once you're moving, the reach to the bars isn't very far at all. Although the tank is very large, it's just a 25 litre tank, you can easily reach the bars. It's not a stretch. It's extremely comfortable, in fact. It's a very good riding position, although the pegs are surprisingly high. It's almost like because you couldn't make up the mind whether this is a sports model or a roadster model. The bars are very comfortable, and the seat's gel seat, so when you first get on it you think this is quite firm, but it's actually very supportive, and it does provide quite a comfortable ride actually. It's very good, because they were very generous with the Brembo brakes, and she does stop very well for her size. I think the main reason we got this particular bike over the Grisso, well, there's twofold. One's the tank range is much better, because on the downside of these bikes they're not terribly fuel efficient. But certainly we got the bike really with touring very much in mind, and it's very good for that. The engine will cruise at motorway speeds in an extremely relaxed manner. It's not working very hard at all. But even better is the way it carries passengers. For a passenger it's excellent. It's comfortable, very spacious rear seat, plenty of leg room, and my wife loves riding on the back of this bike. She absolutely loves it. By modern standards, of course, it's not a powerful bike. Guzzi claims about 86 horsepower. But this is plentiful. Although it's not a long-stroke engine in the Harley sense, it does generate pretty good torque, particularly on the mid-range. So it certainly pulls well enough, and through corners it's a delight because it handles nicely. That weight sort of disappears, and generally you can chuck the bike around in a way which you wouldn't imagine really looking at the size of it. It is a lot of fun, it's a hoot. It's probably easier to ride at speed than the V7, which is a lot lighter. And certainly any ground that you lose, you can more than make up powering out of the corners, because this bike really does launch itself very nicely. Guzzi were also very early uptakers with electronic fuel injection, and of course this bike features it. This helps to make the throttle a notoriously heavy element on Moto Guzzi, a bit lighter. From a maintenance point of view, all Guzzis are extremely good. They're very easy to work on. The shaft drive, of course, means that there's no chain to lube, and you very rarely have to do anything with the transmission. Fit and finish is generally very good. Guzzi were receiving heavy investment from Aprilia initially, and then by the point this time was made, they've been taken over by Piaggio, who invested quite a lot in quality control. The bike is definitely best suited to higher speed riding, cruises down motorways very nicely, which is why, of course, Moto Guzzi built the V-twin in the first place, specifically for that type of riding, and it's very well suited to it. What it probably doesn't work quite as well is certainly in a town situation, you start to notice that weight when you're not moving or moving at very low speed, and of course the control's a little bit heavy and it can be a little bit tiring, and of course the bike can get pretty hot as well if it's stuck in traffic. But overall, as a tourer, it's excellent. I mean, it's really beyond reproach. With a couple of areas, I think. Obviously the weight is an issue, certainly for some if you're smaller. The seat height is about average, it's about 800 mils, so most average people can flat foot on the bike. My wife has it on tiptoe, so she really doesn't like riding it, because obviously tiptoe and a lot of weight makes her feel quite nervous. That said, she's never actually dropped the bike, but she just seems to avoid riding it for that reason. She likes it when it's moving, she just really doesn't like it when it isn't moving. Issues with the bike over 16 years have been very few and far between actually, and usually are the result of ham-fisted maintenance either by myself, embarrassingly, or by dealerships. One dealership I won't mention did not do a great job of servicing the machine at all. You can service it yourself, which is a big cost saving, quite easily. So overall, my favourite bike. I think that's all I can say about it really.